Our next speaker just came from New York and landed from the New York plane. So our next speaker is Ann-Brigitte Albrectsen from United Nations Population Fund. Ann-Brigitte, she has nearly 20 years experience of development work, having held leadership positions in, for instance, in the Danish government and previously in United Nations Development Fund and United Nations Population Fund. Ann-Brigitte's title today is Global Development Trends and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights in the New Development Framework. I would now like to give the floor to you, so welcome so warmly.
Good morning, I guess it is. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. And to be back in Helsinki. I haven't been here for a few years, so despite the rain, it's lovely to be back. Finland is such an important partner for UNFPA and for the UN globally, but even more so, an amazingly important champion for sexual and reproductive health and rights, for gender equality, both as human rights issues, but obviously also as social and economic development issues. We're particularly grateful, now she's gone, but for President Hallinen's role as co-chair of the high-level task force on the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, because she is, as you've obviously just heard and that many of you know, just such a fantastic advocate for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And to have somebody with her background to partner with all of us to promote this issue is tremendously important as we move forward this year, both to review the ICPD as well as to complete the MDGs and set the new development agenda for the next 15 years. But first, before I really start, I just really want to thank the government of Finland for its sustained support for UNFPA and for everything that we do. I'd also like to thank our partners in civil society here in Finland for their support. Now, as we speak, we are heading towards an incredibly exciting 24 months. Let's try and keep that as the time frame for what we will do. During 2014, we will complete all the intergovernmental discussions about the status of ICPD, the status of implementation. We'll take a look at what we've learned in those 20 years. So not just what we've achieved, but also what we'd like to achieve as we move forward. We will hopefully complete and meet the MDGs. I have some hope, despite the sense that not a lot has been achieved. An enormous amount of progress has been made. The force of setting goals in 2000, 15 years ahead, has actually spurred an enormous and unprecedented global coalition for change to meet 8 development goals. The fact that there is a focused agenda that has galvanized real momentum around the world has created real change and has spurred and accelerated development efforts over the past 15 years. I think those of you that were with us in New York here in September at the General Assembly felt that. It was palpable. The fact that we in September could say that there were 729 days left before we had to finish meeting the MDGs, and the enormous commitments that were made, new commitments that were made to actually achieving that agenda. A real sense of can-do and a real sense of we have to do. We have to finish the MDG agenda before we set a new set of agendas for the next 15 years. It would be embarrassing. I mean, we had presidents, we had civil society leaders, we had business leaders, we had all sorts of people in New York just a few weeks ago saying it would be genuinely embarrassing if we can't finish the first set of the agenda before we start a new one. And as I said, new commitments were put on the table. So we have to finish the MDGs, and we have to, and then we have to set the new agenda, set the new targets, set the new goals, set the new targets, set the new indicators for a global development framework. Now, let's just take proper stock of at least one of the MDGs that UNFPA feels particularly close to, in a sense that we really sort of invest a lot of energy in meeting it, and that's MDG 5. First of all, in terms of what we've achieved, maternal mortality has dropped 40% since 1990. 40%. It's an amazing achievement because there has been real focus on it. When that is said, obviously, it is right that we still have quite a way to go. MDG 5 both targets A on reducing maternal deaths and target B on achieving universal access to reproductive health is still the goal that's farthest away from being fully achieved. And yes, some of us are worried that we won't meet it before 2015, but we will certainly do whatever we can. There is slow progress in most countries, and you ask the question why. And I agree with President Hallinan that there's an issue of trust and confidence. But some days when I wake up, I also think that the real problem is that many of the politicians in the world really don't care. The life of a woman and the life of a young girl really doesn't rate particularly high on the political agenda of most developing countries. Inequity and discrimination in access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, information, education and services is a fringe issue. Yes, there are many, many challenges, economic growth, job creation. Yeah, we all have to save the planet in many, many different ways. But what we have to do in the next year is to show and to make sure that every politician on earth also realizes that investing in sexual and reproductive health is genuinely good, makes good economic sense. Our State of the World population report that came out just last week shows that, for example, in Uganda, if every adolescent girl in Uganda that wanted to prevent teenage pregnancy or pregnancy had access to family planning and contraception, it could boost the GDP of Uganda by 30%. It's a staggering economic figure. And we have to get that message to every single politician to make sure that even if the life of the woman and the girl doesn't really matter so much to them, the hard economic facts should at least make a difference. So as we look to the development agenda for 2015, we have to make that shift and that change in the minds of decision makers. And we have to ensure that women's and girls' and all young people's lives are at the heart of the next agenda. It is really the unfinished business and the path that we have to focus on. Just a little bit on gender inequality. Most of this, obviously, is probably very close to your hearts. But let's just remind ourselves that, yes, in all societies, including in the Nordic countries, women and girls continue to face a range of barriers. In my own home country, Denmark, women still earn less for the same job in many situations than men do in the 21st century. And it's a pervasive discrimination that exists in every single country in the world. And although the gender gap in education is closing, and we have made, it's probably the most impressive achievements we've made with the MDGs. More girls go to school now than ever before, also proportionately. There are still far too few or too many girls that are denied schooling or drop out prematurely and therefore don't get the opportunities that they deserve. 2/3 of the world's illiterate people are still women. And combined with poverty, gender discrimination conspires to marginalize poor and otherwise socially disadvantaged. As President Hallinan also said, as part of the gender equality equation is also the issue of overcoming violence against women and girls and all forms of exploitation and abuse. We can only succeed if women have equal access to services, including sexual and reproductive health services, and are able to choose whether and when to have children without coercion and in full confidence of their own health and the health of their child. Now let me just pause for a second. Much of this you've heard before. I want to try and give you a very palpable sense of the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. So a few basic figures that I want you to try and remember, because this is part of our joint advocacy going out of this room. Every 2 minutes, a woman dies giving birth because of preventable and totally preventable causes. So every 2 minutes, a woman dies. Now here's an even more staggering figure. Every 2 seconds, a girl under 18 gets married. And she gets married typically against her will. Every 4 seconds, a girl under 18 gives birth. And every 20 seconds, a girl under 15 gives birth. We have to turn this tide. These figures, this target group, these women that die, these young girls that are forced into marriage, and these young girls that cannot, even if they wanted to, prevent pregnancy, is at the heart of UNFPA's agenda, including the 222 million women that if you went and asked them, do you want a child tomorrow? No. Do you have access to contraception? No. Do you want contraception? Yes, but just don't have access to it. So when we wake up every morning and go to work, this is the target audience of UNFPA. You'll know, many of you, that we work in 150 countries and make this target group the focus of our work, to give access to sexual and reproductive health information and services and choice to everybody. We work on comprehensive sexuality education, access to contraception, maternity care, we train midwives, we treat complications of unsafe abortions, and prevent sexually transmitted infections. One thing that we have done for many years, but perhaps not been as good at as we want to, and I think this goes for the entire development community, is to really focus on the disadvantaged. We've been incredibly good at meeting many millions of women and families in urban areas, in some rural areas, but really getting out there and meeting the most disadvantaged, the most impoverished, the girl that gets married when she's 8 and that never sees society, that is in marriage and is in the household, that nobody really can reach. How do we reach her and get out there? So we're completely rethinking our programming approach so that we can move beyond the urban lower middle class that can access services that maybe they couldn't access 10 years ago. So we've certainly succeeded in getting and reaching many, many millions, but we really need to go that extra mile, because in providing development assistance, we have to make that particular difference. Now, in terms of MDG 5, let me just round that off. It is actually, despite the taboos and despite what President Hallinan calls the difficult issues and the difficulty in talking about sex and sexuality and some of the basic, most intricate parts of our bodies and our lives, it is actually one of the most simple challenges. We know what to do. We don't have to wait for a cure. We know exactly what to do about maternal health and about getting contraception into the hands of people. If you can get a Coca-Cola into every village in the world, you can also get contraceptives into every village in the world. It's as simple as that. To finish the job and to end the needless deaths, we do need political will, though. And we need adequate resources, and we need solid partnerships and much greater accountability so that we can save the lives that we need to save. We cannot advance without taking the most vulnerable with us. Now, let me pause again. I don't know what you think about when you think about the future. Here we are setting a new development agenda for post-2015. Let me try and give you a picture of the future, which is not my picture, but is a picture that was painted to me by a dear colleague. And I think, again, it's a picture that should stay with us when we leave the room. The future is 10 years old, and it's a girl. There are 500 million adolescent girls in the world. Many of them are denied the ability to fulfill the potential that's in them. But just imagine a development agenda that releases that potential, that releases the energy of 500 million adolescent girls over the next 30 years. Every change agenda, every change project in a small organization, in a government, in the world, needs leadership, and that will hopefully come through the UN and through governments and through civil society, etc. But it really needs champions. It needs those that have to live the change and go through the change, that carries it with them every single day, and those champions need empowerment. And the champions for the development of the global future are the 500,000 adolescent girls. I'm not neglecting the boys. The reason why we're focusing so much on those 500,000, or 500 million, sorry, is that they have not yet been fully empowered. There is so much energy to be gotten there that can drive the development agenda of the future. So working with all key partners, UNFPA will continue to advocate for particularly this group, and obviously also for gender equality, as a driving force for the next development agenda. And much of the advocacy that we are doing is beginning to bear fruit. We are in the middle of the process of the ICPD review, and we are seeing that both at the national, regional, and global level, in thematic consultations, in a number of high-level reports, including some of the reports that was mentioned this morning by Helena, we are seeing a growing support for the inclusion of women's empowerment and equality, sexual reproductive health and rights, the rights of young people and particularly girls, and recognizing the importance of population dynamics. But I can tell you, we're just not there yet. It's all there, but every single time this has been enshrined in one of these commitments or documents that have come out, it's been a fight. And it's been a very, very tough fight. So our remaining challenge is really to increase our advocacy and build political alliances to ensure that we include targets relevant targets in the post-2015 agenda. In order to get there, UNFPA would like to see the following goals and targets included in the post-2015 framework. We'd obviously like to see a standalone goal on gender equality, just as we have today, and women's empowerment, as well as mainstreaming of gender equality throughout the entire framework. Under what we assume will be a health goal, we need to have a target on universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. We need a standalone goal on enabling the capabilities of adolescents and youth, particularly girls, for sustainable development. And we need targets under what may become a governance goal or mainstream throughout the framework to improve national capabilities and capacities to make available and analyze socio-demographic and health data, including that relates to the youngest in society, age aggregated appropriately, as well as the oldest in society, because President Hallinan is correct, we do have a gap in data both on the youth side and adolescent side, as well as on the aging side. Now, sometime just before Christmas, the review report for the 20-year review of the ICPD will come out. And I don't know exactly what it'll look like yet. I've seen certain elements of it. But I am convinced that we will have an incredibly robust document with evidence that will, hopefully, with your help, convince decision makers that the ICPD agenda is still very much alive and needs to be enshrined in the post-development agenda. It will reaffirm, and that we will have to reaffirm it, complement it, and expand it. Go beyond where we were 20 years ago. And here is where the real issues will emerge, especially in 14. Governments, we've surveyed 180 governments. Many of them, even where abortion is illegal, put safe abortion as part of a priority for the future. Girls die every day because of unsafe abortions. If we want to address maternal mortality, we cannot deny this issue, despite the sensitivity of it. And it will come out in the review, because country after country is saying we can't allow women to keep dying. The issue of sexual identity is also emerging as one of the issues. Not in necessarily a majority of the reports, but it's certainly seen much more than we saw 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Because again, there are groups of people that are having their rights violated and are being discriminated against on a daily basis around the globe. And that is also emerging as an issue. Aging is very much emerging as an issue. So we have an enormous challenge in front of us when we come to the Commission for Sustainable Development in April, when we come to the special session on ICPD beyond 2014 in September, and when the negotiations for the 2015 agenda move forward. It's obviously member states and governments that decide on the new development agenda, but we'll do our best to try and help and assist them in making the right decisions. Many member states are with us, including Finland, which is a very, very strong advocate for these issues. But I also have to say that with these emerging issues, there are very strong forces, and they are mounting, and they're getting stronger and stronger, that really want to roll back the achievements that we've made over the last 20 years, and even want to reopen the ICPD agenda. And not just the ICPD agenda. I attended a meeting recently. I'm still a little bit in post-traumatic stress. In 1948, the world came together to adopt the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Today, governments seriously, government officials, ministers, seriously are advocating that in Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says that human rights is for all, without distinction of any kind. Some governments have become obsessed with the notion that without distinction of any kind means some kind of endorsement of homosexuality. How can you throw out or even conceive of talking about reopening a basic document that has grown in terms of ownership over the years, and where this language was meant to protect discrimination against race, then discrimination against gender, then discrimination against whatever kind of differences. But this is what the debate is all about. We're standing at the brim of a very, very tough debate. I don't want to call it a values debate, but it's very close. And it will play itself out within the next 48, 12, 24? 24 months. So we need to be creative, not complacent. We need to be tenacious and courageous, and amongst all, we need to be united. And we have to, despite the fact that we tend to, that I don't think there's a majority out there that wants to roll back the agenda. It is, but it's a very, very vocal majority. And they're becoming more and more vocal, and we have to stand together so that what we've achieved over the past 20 years does not get rolled back, and so that we can set some new goalposts. At UNFPA, we count on the continued support of Finland, everybody in this room, and we're grateful that you're by our side. And if we work together, we can deliver a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and where every young person's potential is fulfilled. So as I conclude, let's remember the 10-year-old girl, our future, whose energy is bursting to be released for the good of all humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ann-Brigitte.